He has me up to do the message at this time. And I'm going to deliver that. 2 weeks ago, we were able to observe Artemis II taking off to the moon. From my backyard, I could see the spray behind it. Just a little bit, but I ran out in the backyard and I could see in the distance to the southeast where there it was. And I watched as it took off, and then we all watched with excitement as those four individuals took off for a 10-day trip, a vacation around the moon. And the story behind that is the story of what the men and the young lady said on their journey. Their compliment to the Lord of being able to be in His beauty and experience it. I remember years ago this TV show called The Big Blue Marble. And it was showing and their pictures back to Earth shows this big, beautiful Earth that you and I call home. And it was almost a perfect trip, other than the commode didn't work. That would not be fun. But obviously one of them was a good plumber and they got it all fixed. But the point being that they were following up on 70 years of work that our country has been involved in, and ultimately going to Mars and beyond. One of the comments that I heard them say was, our grandparents were the ones that went to the moon. And I thought about that for a moment. My age of people are the ones who landed on the moon 50 years ago. Can you think about that? With all the stuff that you and I have seen in our lifetime and the development of technology, they had been entrusted with all these different technological things that hopefully is going to get us to the moon and beyond. And their job was to go, not to land, but to test all these new systems that we have developed. They were there to test to see if there was adjustments that needed to make in the next trips that we're planning to take. They were there to test all of these systems. And they were going to go further than anyone had gone before because they went around the back of the moon and they were able to see a sight that you and I have never seen until now. And they understood because they talked about the people who had come before them, and they knew that this is nothing of a final trip, that we're just building on what had been built in the past and what was going to happen in the future. We're just one of the steps in the plan. We're not the final step. We have a temporary assignment that they had been working on for almost 3 years. They were there to do tests, to check out the systems. They knew they had a temporary assignment. They were there to use their talents and their abilities to get the job done. When I thought about that, I thought about, well, they're experiencing tests. They're using their talents and their gifts, their assignments. They've been entrusted with resources that our government, that you and I, have entrusted them with to develop, to get and accomplish the things that our country endeavors to accomplish. They've been entrusted. It wasn't their equipment. It was our equipment. And they had been entrusted with that. They were in a test. They were entrusted with their own talents and abilities and equipment that we provided for them. And they knew that it was a temporary assignment. When I was thinking about their trip and their clear understanding of what was happening with them and for the rest of us, how true it is that life is, first of all, a test. It's a test. It offers us tests that both we succeed in and that we fail in. And those responses throughout our lives, the ups and downs that you and I experience, builds our testimony. All of us have a testimony. All of us have history based on the test of life that come our way. This life is a test, isn't it? Secondly, it's also a trust. You and I have been entrusted by God during this time of our life with certain talents and treasures. He's given us this time, and the way that we use that and develop that is our give back to our God. Every one of us have talents and abilities. Not all are the same. And here's a very important part. The better that you and I develop those talents and use our treasures and use our time, the better that we develop those, the more opportunities that we will have to serve our Lord in a positive and an impacting way. So we're forced with a test. Individually, as a congregation, as a country, we're all facing those kind of situations. And then the third thing that they talked about, that this was not the final assignment for them, it was a temporary assignment, that others would follow behind them, is that life is a temporary assignment. It's a temporary assignment. For sooner and later, we leave this planet. We don't leave home, we're going home. As we talked about Mr. Steele today. He didn't leave home, he went home. And for every person on the planet who's experienced tests, and they will, and you and I do, and that we use our talents and our abilities that we've been entrusted with, sooner or later we will leave and others will pick up where we've left off and how we've handled the case. When I was with you in a previous message, I taught you about Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Remember that? In Genesis, God chose the Israelites, Mr. Abraham. And in Exodus, he redeemed the people through Moses. And then in Leviticus, he taught the people about worship, the offerings and feasts, and how to worship him, that he's a holy God. Then in Numbers, he tested the people. They didn't do very well. They sent 12 spies out. They all come back. They saw the opportunities, but they also saw the tests that they were going to have to deal with. And only 2 of them said, we can do it. Let's go take it. Joshua and Caleb. But the vote was 10-2. Actually, it was 10 against 1 because God says go take it. And so for the next 40 years, they wander in a little bit of area, and everyone 40 years and older passed away, and Moses didn't get to go to the promised land either. And one of the critical things about life is the transition between generation and generation. That's a really important point that I've thought a lot about. Between this generation and the next generation, when we've thought about the people going to the moon, and one generation went to the moon, and then the next generation, we were in the Apollo program, and that didn't go about the moon. That was helping us establish priorities and experience and develop technologies. And now the next transition is now we're going back over the next 2 or 3 years, and now we're going back to the moon and establish a base there where people will live, and then we're going on to Mars. Every transition in our generation is really a critical moment. Because all the people that was under Moses' leadership, save two, and everybody under 40 years of age that were born in the wanderings, every one of those was ready for a transition. They had been in a holding pattern, and it was time to get up and go. All of us have been in holding patterns in our lifetime. The song that we sing today and the music was chosen was very appropriate for the message today. Many of us have been in a holding pattern at different stages of our life. And then all of a sudden the green light goes and it's time to go. It's time to get up and go. And now after 40 years, after running away from the Egyptians, after all the plagues that God had shown, all of these things to establish his credibility that he could take care of you, that he was going to give you the promised land that he had told Abraham hundreds of years before. He never, even though transitions of generations had changed, that promise that God had made never wavered. So here he comes to the end of his life, and Moses gives them the second law. Use your fingers. He gave them the second law. He gives them the second laws. He gives them three great messages. He tells them God, and he just reminds them of their history, of where God has brought them. He says, it's time for me to move off the scene. My assignment is temporary. It's now up to a new generation. He's completed his assignment. He's been a faithful steward. And he again tells them, and he teaches them, and he gives them the second law. Watch this. He gives them the second law. Then Moses dies. Try that. Second law, Moses dies. God is still right there. And so we come to the book of Joshua, named for the man who actually wrote the book, and his goal is to be a warrior. The whole book of Joshua is about conquering the promised land. When it comes to the divisions of Joshua, the first 5 chapters is about preparation, about getting ready to take over the land. And there's 3 main issues in the first 5 chapters. There's Joshua, and his sign is, try it with me. Now don't knock yourself out. Joshua. Then there's Jericho. 3 J's. Jericho. But in the middle of Joshua and Jericho, they got to put their foot in the water. Right in the middle is Jordan. Joshua, Jordan, Jericho. This is Joshua. When you hear me say Joshua, boom. There's the Sea of Galilee up here. Try that. Then the Jordan River, just a little wiggle. Then the Dead Sea at the bottom. Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea. Joshua, Jordan, and then there comes Jericho. And this is, boom. It just collapses. Boom. And in those 3, it's a time of preparation in those first 5 chapters. Moses has left, and God comes to Joshua, and he says, my servant has died, and now you've been chosen to lead the people into the promised land. And before he just says, go sick them, he takes Joshua and he gives him an individual pep talk. You talk about a pregame pep talk, a locker room, jack them up and go get them. He fires up Joshua. And he tells him one of the most famous little quotes that's on our wall at home, on our desk and in our offices. He tells him in Joshua 1:8, be strong and, yeah, we know that. Excuse me. We know that. And he gives him this great pep talk. And then Joshua, and he tells Joshua, he says, there's two things. You got to be and you got to do. I'm going to keep my promise. Excuse me, let me get a drink of water. I'm going to keep my promise, but you've got to be something and you got to do something. You got to be careful and you got to do what's right in this book. He gives him a GPS, doesn't he? He gives him that GPS. He says, you don't go to the right, you don't go to the left, you go straight down the middle. Hit the ball right down the middle. Keep it in the short grass. You're a golfer. So he says, I've kept my promise. All along the way, I've given you miracles. I've shown you that I can be trusted. Even though you grumble and complain, I gave you manna and quail. Joshua, these people are ready to go. So he, as a good soldier and a good leader, a good commander, he pulls in the heads of the tribes, their leaders. And in turn, he gives them the same pep talk that God gave him. And it goes, oops, there's something we got to deal with before we go fight Jericho. You remember what it was? All those young men had grown up east of the Jordan, had not been circumcised. And so they had to take time and circumcise everybody. That wasn't fun. And so for a month, they're in preparation. They consecrate themselves. They prepare their hearts. They're getting ready to go and take Jericho. Now, we need to understand that in your life and mine, that when we're in a holding pattern never means that God is not working. He is always working. Say that with me. He is always working. Always. Because all the things that he had been doing in Egypt and their escape had gone ahead of them, and the people in Canaan had heard all these stories and had scared them to death. Remember that? They were already scared. The Israelites may not have known that until they sent two spies. Remember that? Joshua sent the two spies, and he visited Rahab, the great-grandmother of David. And she had heard the news about what was going on with them. She said, the people are scared to death. I don't want to be a part of your massacre when you come in here. Will you save me and my people? And they made a promise to keep her. And when they entered. And when they come to Jericho, they had the resources. Okay? He's a military commander. They have these people, but they didn't have as many people as the combined armies of the others. God wanted to prove to them at Jericho that just a large army and resources is not always enough. I can do things that you don't need the major army and the resources. I can do it on my own to prove you that being obedient to God and listening to his word and following through is more important than having all these resources. They're not bad resources. They're important resources. But doing it my way, my will, in my time is the right thing to do. Are you with me? So we have Joshua, and now God says, I've promised you this, but you got to get your feet wet. Don't you? He's not going to sit there and do it on his own, though he could. He says, I promise you this, but you got to obey and do this. And when they put their foot in that water and they put that stick down and the Jordan River separated, they went across. And they had this plan. It's not our major plan of how to take Iran. We didn't go over there and go blowing around, with trumpets. We just bombed the snot out of them. That's what we did. But he has a plan. It's not traditional, but he wanted to tell them that I'm still here. I can do whatever I need to do as long as you're obedient. Were they obedient? Yes. Yeah, they were. Good learning, wasn't it? Tired of hearing their moms and dads grumble over there. I wish we had done what we were told to do in the first place. Well, you were the ones that wanted to go back into Egypt. You were the one that was grumbling. I don't want to hear that. We're way past that. They'd had it up to here. I think God means what he says. So they crossed over the Jordan. And they come to Jericho, and they did what they were supposed to do, and they marched around that, and they blew their horns and trumpets, and boom, it fell down. In the first 5 chapters of Joshua, it's about Joshua, whose name is God of salvation. He's a type of Christ. Joshua, Jordan, Jericho. From chapters 13 to 19 or so, Joshua and the people start the campaigns. There are 3 major campaigns. They're battling 30 different armies. You think about that. And it works this way. He uses a military tactic. Smart guy. He goes in and he divides and he conquers the south and he conquers the north. He divides the country. So those two can't get together. So this is the way it works. You got your hands ready? Divide, conquer the south, and conquer the north. He goes in. And as long as they're obedient to God, they're able to divide, conquer the south, and conquer the north. Chapter 7, we know the story. But when the instructions is that you take all your resources, when you beat the people in Jericho or whatever city is, everything, gold, silver, whatever, it goes into the treasury. It don't go into the middle of your tent underground. Everybody but one guy believed that. And so Joshua goes, go take Ai. You don't even need everybody. You guys go up there. God's going to have it prepared. And they go up there and they get whooped. They turn tail and run right back down the hill. Uh-oh, something is bad in River City. And Joshua says, what's going on? Lord. It is just typical. He's doing what he's supposed to do. He's the leader. He's followed God. And all of a sudden, they didn't win. Lord. Doesn't the leader ever wants to have doubt and concern and frustration too? Lord, why? We've got us all over here. Well, we got defeated. That's not right. That wasn't the plan. Then he gets his head together and he goes, wait a minute. Something's going on in the camp. They go through and investigate and they come and there's Achan. And Achan says, I have sinned against the Lord. Really important point. I have sinned against the Lord. I sat and thought about that for a long time, how they dealt with Achan and his family. They take him out of the city. They stone him. and they burned them. Now, what it reminds us of is that God is a holy God. It also reminds me that secret sins, when we have difficulties in our lives or when we have failures in our lives or things are not going right, sometimes they can be traced back to hidden sins. I'm just saying. Not always, but in this case, the sins of one and their family, their greed, caused the whole group of Israel to collapse because they didn't know, but what's a secret on earth. Listen, what's a secret on earth is a scandal in heaven. In your own personal life, in our country's life, and just watch our government this past week. Secret sins can all of a sudden become public scandals. Remember what Joseph told him? Hey, I'm not going to deal with your wife. The Lord knows. So they get it cleared up, and they go in and they divide the country. They conquer the south. They conquer the north. And then the remainder of the time, they go back in and they divide and they settle the land. Got it? Divide, conquer, divide, settle. And they settle the land. They settle the land and they divide it up among the 12 tribes. Remember the story? And they put 2.5 of them stayed on the east side of the Jordan because it was really, they had been over there for a long time and they had found that it was good country for farming and cattle and all that kind of stuff. And they wanted to stay. And okay, we've conquered it. So he put 2.5 on the east side. And the other 9.5 he settled among Canaan. Now just stop for a moment. Because God's promised us something doesn't mean that we're not going to have battles getting it done. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be stuff in the land. There's going to be things that we don't need to deal with in the land. There's going to be people that are not supposed to be teaching us how to worship. Think about our country right now. We go, you're telling me that 700 Muslims knelt down in the middle of Dallas and prayed to their God? You're telling me that? And God says, you don't tolerate that. You do not intermarry with them, and you do not take on their gods. So they divide and they settle the land. And then Joshua, because the Levites didn't have their own land, he had to take time and place them in 48 different locations throughout Canaan. He put the Levites. And that takes time, took several years. And last, as we move close to the end, well, what about Joshua? We don't hear him talking about, well, where's Joshua going to go? Is anybody thinking about Joshua? He's helped us find our land. He's led us through the campaigns, 3 major ones and 30 armies, and dealt with all this stuff. He's helped settle the land. God has blessed us by our obedience, and he's brought peace to the land. And so they say, Joshua, you got to have a place. Where would you like to go? And Joshua says, I would really like to live there. And you say, you got it. And they placed him there. And when it comes to chapter 24 and 23 of Joshua, it's a generational change. Are you with me here? Mm-hmm. His whole life has been test. Battle after battle after battle. Conquering, settling, battle after battle after battle. We know that he was fit for the battle of Jericho. But he had to be fit for every battle in Canaan. He obeyed and God promised. God promises and you obey. Because when we obey, he brings the blessing. He doesn't bring the blessings and then we obey. We obey and we put our foot in the Jordan and we obey, and that in turn, that active faith brings on the blessing. And all the people said, amen. So, what does he do? He does the very same thing that Moses did. He gathers them all together. He's 110 years old now. And he gives them a farewell address. Try it. Farewell. He gives them a history lesson. He reminds them about what God has done for them. He calls them to challenge to obey their gods. Another verse. In Joshua, there's two things. Joshua 1:8, and then in the chapter 24, you remember? He says to those people, he says, okay, for today, choose who you're going to serve. And we know what the rest is coming, don't we? For me, it's up in our house. For me and my house we shall. That's right. You got to state it. He said it publicly. And he said, you got to choose. And they said, we're choosing the Lord. And the scripture says at the very end of that chapter that throughout his life and all the leaders, they obeyed God and there was peace in the land. Not just, the leaders are critical here. Those young people had learned. They had been through battles. And they said, we know from our history. What is that statement? One thing we don't learn from history is that we don't learn from history. For the book of Joshua, bless his holy name. The majority of Joshua is winning. And he took care of business. The first time there's sin in the camp, you confront it, you deal with it, seek for mercy, and move on. You don't let it drag out. Do you hear me? Because you're headed to the promised land. And you can't get to the promised land with hidden sins. Because they're not hidden. Well, let's try it. Moses gave us the second law, and then he dies. The first 5 chapters is Joshua, Jordan, Jordan, then Jericho. Boom. Then the next is divide and conquer. You conquer the south, he conquered the north. Then he comes back in and he divides and he settles the land. Then he does a farewell address. Let me give you some application and I'm finished. Joshua is he always brings a smile to your face when you think of Joshua. From the standpoint that we know that he fit the battle of Jericho. Actually, God fit the battle of Jericho. But he was obedient. Here's the 3 applications. Test calls for an active faith. If you want to write it down. Test calls for an active faith, which leads to obedience, which in turn brings blessing. I'll say it again. Test calls for an active faith, which leads to an obedience, which in turn brings blessings. Don't get them out of order. Number 2. I got to tell you this. Our test and our obedience creates our testimony for those in the past, for those in the present, and for those to come. Our handling of the test in our lives right now, individually, as a congregation, as a country, we are developing our testimony. That's when we call them testimony meetings. It's not about what we did, it's about what God did with us and in us. That's our testimony. Number 2, and I give credit to Patty for that. She said, oh, test, that's our testimony. Number 2, you need to trust in your talents and your time and your treasures that God has given you. He's entrusted you and I with certain abilities. I stopped here the other day and I counted out the number of jobs I've had in my life. It come down to like 27 jobs. I don't know if it communicates to you that I've been fired 27 times. A few. But I mean, the more that you develop your talents in a wider range of places, the better you can be blessed. But you got to put your foot in the water. They had never seen the Jericho go boom. Woo! I just got set on fire. Woo! I didn't even have to march around and blow it out. I just, boom. Is there a medic here in the house? No. Yes. So, this is the point on number 2. Do your best and let God do the rest. Amen. Do your best and let God do the rest. Say it with me. Do your best and let God do the rest. He didn't give you those abilities and talents and treasures, your children, your family, whatever. He didn't give them to you just, whoop, you're up. No, that's true. They're a blessing. And our development of those and care for those is our gift back to God. Number 3. A temporary assignment. We have tests in our lives as the Israelites. They used their talents and their abilities. It didn't say Joshua went out there and blew the trumpet. He had his job. They had their job. The singers, the people, it didn't say they had to have great voices. Oh, you're the next choir director of this church, I guarantee. Mama's going to it's a generational change coming right now. That's pretty good, Jack. I need to put that. And you're saying, no, it's not. It's a temporary assignment. Oh, that's fine. It's fun to be with you. It's a temporary assignment. So this is the way we have to learn to think. We have to think in eternity mindset. We have to think from an eternity mindset. When we face test, we think about it in the span of eternity, not just today. Now, granted, you understand what I'm saying there, but we have to train to think an eternity mindset, which will lead us to live daily in an eternity mindset, because it's a temporary assignment. We're not leaving home, we're going to the promised land. One last. Moses gave us the second law, then he died. Jordan Jericho, boom. Divide, conquer the south, conquer the north. Divide, settle the land. Farewell address, farewell, so long. And where is God? He's in the next chapter. Heavenly Father, I don't know how much Joshua even thought about how his story would linger throughout eternity. But it has. And if there's a man like Joshua that can stand the test and understand his assignment, though difficult it may be, he got his feet wet. And with that, so can we. Dear Lord, give us a backbone like a saw log, a tender heart and a tough skin, and great ears to hear that we're to be careful to do all that's written in this book. Lord Jesus, be with this congregation. And may they learn and continue to learn that God's already been there. He's already been there. He's still working. He's always working. We trust and obey because there's no other way. In your name we say, amen. All right.